Hi, my friends.
Hi, friends.
Hi,
How
how
are
are
you
you?
guys? I'm fine.
Good. Fine too.
Great. That's
Yeah.
great. What about you, Daniel?
I'm okay, fresh night here.
That's so nice. Before we start, I have to say, and I was talking with Daniel about this. Here in my state, we're having a couple of rainy days, so a couple of days we're having very bad internet connection here, so I can't open my camera and still listen to Nora and Daniel. So that's why I close it so I can be heard more properly and can hear you guys very clear. Okay, we're again here to talk about one more beautiful chapter of this book, Paul and Stephen. We're on chapter 5, and we're gonna talk the whole chapter tonight. Before we're starting, Nora will pray for us as usual, and then we can go ahead without any further ado. Okay.
All right. Let us close our eyes. Dear Mother, Father, God, we thank you so much for another opportunity, for another day, for this beautiful gift of life, of studying, of friendships, of understanding, and just coming together, creating a beautiful link, a link of love, peace, harmony, and just joy to the world. As we study this evening, whether live or on demand, we ask blessings for every single person that is accompanying this, inspiration for our brother João, for Daniel, myself, and that our homes are illuminated. Let's say Hail Mary's prayer. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Hail Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners and at the hour of our death. And with that, we ask permission to begin. So it is.
Beautiful. Thank you, dear, so much. So we're on chapter 5, which is called Stephen's Preaching. Um, Last week we saw Saul making arrangements with his friend Sadok of going to that church in Jerusalem in which those so-called men of the way were having their meetings. So, chapter 5 begins with the two friends entering the humble church in Jerusalem and noticing the compact crowd of poor and miserable people gathered together with a ray of hope in their eyes. So, that's where we're positioned. John, the apostle, Peter, and James, other apostles, got really surprised at the presence of the young doctor of the law. As we've talked last week and in previous studies, Paul Saul, yet he was very famous. They offered Saul the most comfortable bench, which he accepted with undisguised irony at everything he saw. That was his mental attitude. Inwardly, Saul was thinking that that story of Sadok's, as we've seen again in previous chapters, Sadok's uncle being healed, Saul thought that was a huge lie. And amid all those elderly, invalids, and infirm people, what could those unlearned men do? That's what Saul was thinking. And this really reminds us of a very beautiful part of the gospel. We're in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, the first chapter. We have a very special moment when Jesus calls Philip and Nathaniel on verse 46. When Philip tells Nathaniel that they had found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote, and when he tells him that his name was Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph, Nathaniel asks, Nazareth, can anything good come from there? And just like that, we're seeing Saul of Tarsus skeptical that anything good could come from that humble church fulfilled with needy people. But as we all know, from Nazareth came the Christ. So we're going to see what comes from that very humble place full of amazing things. Saul was thinking, What could be dangerous to the law of Israel in those abandoned children and half dead women? In those hearts, all hope seemed to have been extinguished. Which harm could they offer? Saul felt ill at ease in looking at so many faces that leprosy had devastated, that malignant ulcers had mercilessly disfigured. This is the scenario. An interesting thing is that Saul, he saw other people he knew from Judaism and were there also to see those humble men in action. As we've seen before, there were loads of people very curious about them. While Saul was reflecting on how that scene was unpleasant to his eyes, the room got full of people, and then he heard those suffering people saying, Stephen, it's Stephen, Stephen is coming. And then we enter properly in this chapter and what this chapter brings us. Sudden silence kept everyone in extraordinary expectation about that man named Stephen. The thin and pale young man prayed, and now we're talking about Stephen. The book brings that image from him. He was praying in a loud voice, asking for himself and the assembly the inspiration of the Almighty. Next, he opened the scroll and read a passage from Matthew. In our current versions of the Bible, it is in Matthew chapter 10, verses 6 and 7. But instead, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven has come. Stephen gave them a beautiful speech that we cannot bring here in its integrity. But he finished saying this. He finishes saying this: Christ is the substance of our freedom. A day will come when his kingdom will encompass the children of the East, West in one embrace of fraternity and light. Then we shall understand that the gospel is God's answer to our appeals in light of the law of Moses. The law is human, the gospel divine. Moses is the guide, Christ the Savior. The prophets were faithful stewards. Jesus, however, is Lord of the vineyard. Under the law, we were slaves. Under the gospel, we are free children of a loving and just Father. This is beautiful. At that point, Stephen suspended the words that were flowing harmoniously and vibrantly from his lips, inspired by the purest sentiment. The listeners of all categories were unable to hide their amazement in light of his ideas of living revelations. The crowd was captivated with the principles he expounded. This is very nice. This amount of hope that the gospel was bringing to all those unfortunate beings. Um, Saul of Tarsus, emotional by temperament, was caught up in the wave of general wonder. Although highly surprised, he discerned the difference between the law and the gospel being announced by these strange men whom his intellectual power was unable to grasp. And this is a very interesting thing because when we think about the differences that the gospel brings when it comes from comparing to the Old Testament, we could think that the Bible would be this book full of controversies. But um, and that's the beauty of it, and the most important thing, the Christ is the main paradigm, the main north through which we read this entire text. So when we think, and we're talking here about admitting the Bible as a historical literary book, when we look to it and we know that it has this principle north, so it gets very well settled. In one glance, he realized the danger this new doctrine would cause to mainstream Judaism. This is very nice. And why is that? When he saw that Stephen was very, very well informed about the Old Testament. He knew that all that structure, that discourse, that speech, it made very, very much sense when they were acknowledging that the Christ had already come. And as we know, today in 2022, Judaism is still waiting for their Messiah. The Jews, they think that the Messiah has not come yet, because when he comes, or she, I'm not 100% sure, but as we know, Kabbalah has loads of new interpreters about the Old Testament and the Torah. When this Messiah comes, in their understanding, he or she will be this huge king or queen. And this is the most important thing, that they could not accept that Christ that was condemned in the middle of two thieves. um, so the book brings us that in one glance, Saul realized the danger this new doctrine would cause to mainstream Judaism. To his mind, it was imperative to eliminate the confusion that was beginning to be sketched regarding Moses. The law was one and unique. The Christ, who ended in defeat between two thieves, appeared to his eyes as a deceiver unworthy of any consideration. Stephen's victory caused him indignation. And this is a very important thing for us to know and to be very aware. um, in this book, Saul was very pride. He was carrying this huge amount of pride, and he thought he was the main leader, the main orator. And when he saw this very young man, full of hope, bringing hope to those that he thought was a bunch of hopeless ground, full of needy people, he was very scared, because at the end of the day, he was feeling already that that speech made load of sense. The orator, and now the book is referring to Saul, was about to resume his momentarily interrupted sermon, which was awaited with joyful expectation, when the young doctor audaciously stood up and spoke almost angrily, coloring what he had to say with obvious sarcasm. And now Daniel will continue.
Thanks. So Saul goes, I'll make a little reading. Pious Galileans, where is the sense of in this strange and absurd doctrine? How dare you proclaim the false supremacy of an obscure Nazarene over Moses, right here in Jerusalem itself, where the destiny of the invisible tribes of Israel is being decided? Who was this Christ? Was he not a simple carpenter? So a debate starts, and we'll see that um, the emotional control of Stephen will hurt the pride of Saul even more deeply. So everybody got intimidated by such strong stance from Saul, but Stephen could keep his thoughts organized and replied, "It is fortunate that the Messiah was a carpenter, for humankind will be no longer without shelter." That response is even kind of witty. Imagine how much that made Saul angry. Never again will wander aimlessly in the storms or in the wake of chimerical ideas of so many who live by calculation without the clarity of sentiment. That uh, reminded me of a figure of speech of the angel's wings. Like one wing is the morality, and another wing is the knowledge. And so the flight is not clumsy. Both wings have to work with the same strength. So you have to develop morality and knowledge equally. And this part, living by calculation without the clarity of sentiment, is like you live only by the reason, only by the knowledge, and you can't feel, you don't feel empathy, you don't feel love uh, for other people in a fraternal way. And Saul, at that point, was furious, and he was used to reign over anyone who dared to challenge his arguments. And he decided to recite some of the most famous deeds performed by Jesus and connected them to the divine ancestry recognized by the Christians. And by that, Saul mocked his simplicity and the way he died, unable to save himself, dying between two criminals. So, as a closure, Saul points out that the Christians want to build a new kingdom by outraging Israel, since Jesus was a common deceiver, judged by judged as criminal and sentenced to death. And so he's really outraged and saying to the men of the way, how dare you to make a martyr out of a common deceiver, sentenced to death by the Sanhedrin. And that made him so mad, so angry. He's losing his cool completely. He's losing his mind at that point. Stephen already had a counterpoint as soon as Saul took a break, and he brilliantly compared people's ability to think more deeply since they fled slavery to the development of a child. And this is a figure speech to the spiritual growth of a whole nation plus their own treasure of leanings. You know, people are living uh, decades after decades and building their own treasures, their own spiritual treasures, and it is morality and knowledge. Um, so Stephen compares the the lessons of Jesus to something that you teach to someone to that that reached that became a teenager. You won't teach the same things to a child, or to a teenager, or even to an adult. And the lessons of Jesus shows that people have grown and they are more moralized and they have much more knowledge and they are able to understand such profound teachings Jesus brought. Uh, Stephen goes on comparing God's plans to the battles promoted by the kings of the earth, and at this point, I personally felt so pitiful in front of the great intelligence behind God's plans. Christ built his empire within the hearts of humankind, and the gospel is love in its most sublime expression. He's the shepherd who loves his sheep and won't lose any of them. And this is a very important part. We can comment that later. But this so expressive. Stephen says that Christ built his empire within our hearts, and it is not made of stones. It's not. He is not the Lord of the armies, as the Jewish people was waiting. Saul was even more furious. I'll keep repeating that, but he was really mad and willing to win the debate since he was used to be victorious. But Stephen would not continue, and stated, Jesus taught us to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And if you have any legal accusation against me, expose it, and I will obey you. But only God can judge me for what concerns to him. And this puts closure to his argument, and he says, I won't debate anymore. If you have any legal accusation, just say it. If you don't, let me work in this house. Saul makes an effort to put himself together back, and but Stephen once more states they won't waste time debating in a house built to work in Christ's name. And Saul once again loses his cool and promises to appeal to the Sanhedrin to condemn the condemnation of them all, to all the men of the way. And at this point is, I imagine it was a very ugly scene when he loses his mind and starts to yell and say these things like he's so uh, powerful to decide about the lives of so many people that were uh, merely helping the unfortunate. It became clear that those people would not renounce to Jesus' doctrine for the fear of the Sanhedrin. And Saul was always trying to keep the debate, and he really wanted to win the debate. And he was chasing Stephen around the house. Then an old woman approached Stephen and revealed she was once saved by Jesus and to help asked him to help her daughter, who was mute for for over a year. And Stephen felt the responsibility of helping, but he said, "Well, we don't have much to do for for your child." But he felt this faith in his heart and just said, "Open your mouth and speak in praise of Jesus Christ." And the girl just opened and said, "I will praise the God. I will praise Jesus Christ for all my life." And imagine the scene, the buzz it caused, and Stephen cried when it happened. And Saul was thinking of engaging a fight with all his rage. He was at that moment thinking, I really want to kill this man. I want to beat him to death. And all uh, his companions wanted the same, but he noticed that it might have not a favorable outcome, and decided to keep the law by his side. And he just walked away. And Saul left the house of the way with his pride really hurt, and the apostles were considering the consequences about to come. Now, Norah, it's with you.
It's so beautiful how you guys are sharing this story. João introducing us, to all these events, and then Daniel got like the meat of it, the whole thing, and just those beautiful miracles. We can imagine at that time how it must have been. And so now I know João had brought a little bit of the Bible, and I love what you also mentioned about that, because this is a book where we do need to understand a little bit of the historical parts of the Bible. And I'm gonna share my screen. I think we got this. Where did it go? Right here, because it's really gonna help us understand. I cannot see my screen, but it is. Are the slides coming out? I can only see the slides. I
Dear,
can't.
it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
It's working fine.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Awesome. So
Saul's
we
conviction.
okay, now we'll get the summary first of the last of the of this chapter, because now, as we had, as Jean introduces Salatarsis in the scenario, and then in Daniel's part, Salatarsis is confronting Stephen, and we see more of those beautiful manifestations of I'm going to use the word miracle again. We are talking about Bible, so I'm going to use some of that Bible terminology, but to see the way that they use the fluids and the magnetic energy to that Stephen used. In this end of the chapter, after all of that happened, Abigail and Saul, they go and they have a conversation. So Saul starts opening up just his impression of everything with Stephen and what he just saw, and he was like, "What's going on?" And Abigail is coming in and saying, "Okay, I support you. I acknowledge, right?" And she acknowledged the parts of his concern of, what are these individuals spreading, right? But at the same time, she was saying, Saul, please be careful not to punish. It's to educate. If you're going to look into this further, it's to educate, not to be in that sense of like going in there and using the law and so forth. And Saul was probably like, we can imagine, right? But Abigail was very curious, and she asked, where are these people from the way? Are they spreading? Are there more of these people? And Saul was like, yes, there is. And then she makes a comment and just simply says, how I wish, just Sal was here, because he would know what to say, right? Which was beautiful, because all this time it is her brother. So after this, Abigail and Saul, they just talk about their relationship and they go separate ways. The book then skips a couple of days and says that Saul asked Stephen to go and appear in court. He's like, I'm not going to appear to dispute, because that's not the message of the Messiah. So then, of course, Saul is very, very, very upset at this, right? And that just adds a lot of momentum to the plot. So he goes and looks for this man by the name of Nehemiah, and he's a man of the law. He's like, I need your help. I need the law on our side. And so they both together come up with a plan to accuse Stephen of sorcery and falsifying the information, right? And because they just witnessed the healings and all of that. So now with this, it's by law, Stephen will have to appear before Sanhedrin. And so when they get the news, of course, everybody was like, "Oh my gosh!" Right? It's Stephen and the group in the way, except the book says, except Stephen, Simon, Peter. Who was else? They didn't. They had the conviction, but eventually, even James, they came around. But it was beautiful how Stephen just prayed and had that faith that everything's going to be all right. So that's how the chapter ends at the end. But just to put all of this information, it really helps to understand, a little bit of the Bible actually. And this is under the assumption here, one, I'm not a Bible expert, so I know there might be lots of other, perhaps some videos or different other guidelines, or I mean, study guides and stuff that have more information. But just to have a little background on Saul and to understand, last chapter we saw Saul in one area, right? When he communicates with Abigail, he's working on it. But I think that this time, let's give Saul a little bit of credit, right? In the sense of what he is doing. It's his conviction with God, actually, right? Because he was following the law of the time. We talked about this as well last time with the customs and the culture and what was. So if we were to just say, wow, even though we know that it's not nice because we're on like Steven's side, but that passion that he had, that energy of being convicted to God in that way, is super important and is very, very powerful in for who he is. And another thing that helps us now as spirituals looking back, nobody comes here perfect. Some parts of us are refined and better, and some other ones we're working on them. And so I think Saul teaches that, right? Has been teaching us that for sure. Now, we go back. So, what is this law of Moses? So, we're going to go to the Bible. This is all Bible. That's why I have the slide, friends, because I would have to be flipping over my Bible and that would take a while. So, we start with Exodus 20 with the 10 commandments, and after that, it's more laws, plus more laws, plus more laws. Leviticus, which is from the Levites or God's priests, and the two, this book has more laws, so many rules for the people, for the priests, right? But we can safely say that these laws, they were like a compass for them to navigate, right? From a slaver out into the new land, right? It was very important. Then we have the book of Deuteronomy, which means second law. Now it's like we have these laws endorsed. In here, we could read Moses' first speech, which Israel's history was super important. We have more rules, and more rules, and the results of being obedient and disobedient. So this is a lot to intake. But what's really interesting, if we look specifically Deuteronomy 6, right? How is it that Saul's convictions, where do they come from, and is it necessarily something to like, whoa, it's their lineage, just as Ron said at that time, law of Moses was in there. And Moses tell him, impress the law of the God, the commandments on your children. Talk to them about it when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. So here we have a Moses who was a man of God and was telling the people of Israel, this is what you need to do. And not only that, he continues saying, fear the Lord your God, serve him, and only take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the people around you. For the Lord your God who is among you is a jealous God, and his anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land. And he says, do what is right and good in the Lord's sight, so that it may go well with you, and you may go in and take over the good land. And the Lord promised an oath to your ancestors. This is just for us to see it is written for them to follow. And we can safely say that Saul was actually doing that. So this is something that's really good. And perhaps that's why Abigail was around too, because there was this part of him that she particularly took note of, right? Another thing that Joan said, I was minding here because I was like, this is exactly what we're going to talk about now. Well, did the people have signs? And we can go to Isaiah 7. They already had some revelations, right? For, chapter 7, verses 14 says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we will call him Emmanuel. Chapter 9 says, now, who is this? For us to a child is born, and a son is given. The government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from the time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. So we can, with this revelation, we see that these prophecies, right, as maybe perhaps some of us that have studied the Bible, we see it this way, was describing how Jesus the Christ was going to be, and he was going to cause, right here, something in the government. He was born a leader, was going to cause things. So we do have proof later on, and to remind us where we're at here, to reference the Bible and the book. Jesus had just disincarnated, gone to heaven, however people feel comfortable seeing that scenario. But Jesus had just left this realm and went back to his original state. And so these were fresh stories. So they knew they were pros. So we can imagine how things were a little bit unstable. But one beautiful time was when she was talking to the Samaritan woman, and she says, I know that Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I am the one speaking to you. I am he, right? So here we have Jesus already hinting. And then later in John 7, Jesus himself is telling them, yes, you know me and you know where I am from. I'm not here on my own authority, but he who sent me is true. You do not know him, but I know him because I am from him and he sent me. And he continues on the last and greatest day of the festival. He says, let anyone who's thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. So these are hints to the actual people where Jesus is interacting and doing this, right? And then this is a part, as João had also mentioned, the people were kind of like on the fence. Some, as we read here in John 7, surely this is the man of the prophets. And other people, he was like, no, he's not the Messiah, right? Because how can a Messiah just be born like this? And he's supposed to come from David and be descendants and be all of that, that as João said. So then we know that if we were to look at it from that historical perspective, actually, Saul was following what he needed to follow. But now let's talk a little bit about Stephen, because Stephen also had his way of being, right? And Stephen, we recall, right after Jesus had left, this is when the disciples were staying in, and he comes back from they freed him from slavery, so he ends up at the house of the way with Simon Peter, taking him almost as his own son, and these um, disciples had already been around Jesus. So this is the kind of training that they have. Jesus had already told you, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is you, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you, right? And it's not, they treat you like that because they don't know who sent me, right? And he says on John 16, it's a warning. He says, I've told you that you will not fall away. They will put you out of the synagogue. In fact, the time is coming when anyone who kills will think they're offering a service to God. They will do such things because they have not known the Father. I've told you this so that when their time comes, you will remember that I warned you about them. So imagining us, friends, going back to Stephen, this is the kind of training that Stephen had from Simon Peter, the mentors, and everyone. So Stephen is trained for this. So what's happening with this dynamic? It's bound to happen. They are ready for it because even the reactions that we have, where Stephen was very strong in his conviction. That's the kind of training, and we've talked about this before. We all come with a mission, so we all have those tools in us to have, and we see the beauty how every part is very important to the story. So it so far is working beautifully. And this idea here in the book of Hebrews, where it talks a little bit about how now Paul is telling his, the people there, guys, nobody's saying that Moses is not this. Moses was a faithful servant, right? Imagine, for every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was a faithful servant in God's house, bearing witness to what be spoken by God, but in the future. But Christ is faithful as the Son over God's house, and we are his house, if indeed we can hold firmly to our confidence and the hope in which we glorify. So, this whole thing, as they're saying, it's a system built for a purpose, and that purpose was super important as we read through the story of Stephen and Saul. Those contrasts that we talked about, they just actually complement each other and they make this message even stronger. So when we look at both, we have Saul and then we have Stephen, we start to see how this dynamic is like fulfilling a very, very important message, and that everything is in its own place, and that they both have the same passion. As a matter of fact, when we looked at it, right? And it is just that we have very read if we read the Bible, we know what's to come, but we can say that this is something that I particularly look up to Saul for that. I know that eventually we know what's going to happen, so that's good. And so to end with the Bible references, because this is a study with the Bible, Acts 22, we actually have firsthand account of Saul saying, I was just as zealous for God as any of you today. I persecuted the followers of this way, and etc. So he takes those are his own words. And if anyone wants to read more from the Bible about Stephen's account, it is on Acts chapter 16, 8 to 15. And in just to pin that, all the time Stephen is described as always a man of God with grace. Um, he was um, he was they could not stand up against the wisdom of the Spirit as he spoke. Very, very beautiful. And he described him with eyes of angels. His eyes were very angelic, you can say. So he was very, 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 um, very special. And I'm not sure how much more we can talk about this, because I'm sure the book and policy will have more. But it's so beautiful when we think about this book that is bringing us all the details that the Bible doesn't have. I think we're getting just so much more the amplification of the story, and that's where the beauty comes in from this book. Now, Abigail is always coming in with her beautiful message. One thing, she planted those seeds when she was having that conversation with Sal. Imagine, friends, if she didn't have that, you know, like those seeds, that faith, that even if it's not something that we see, and even the story itself, we know that, Stephen got away with it. He actually got Saul got away with it and got Stephen to go into court, but the seed was planted, and that was very important. Another interesting thing is that Abigail felt Giselle's energy, so this is alluding again to the fact of this connection that we have. And it's interesting because the concepts stay the same throughout time. It's just the way they're told. So at that time, the alignment was, she's just, oh, if Giselle was here. But in actuality, today we have knowledge to know that she was actually feeling that connection with him from a spiritual angle, right? And I know we've been studying Andre's book, talks so much about just how we're all connected magnetically. And of course, her love, very beautiful love. So to finish up, so we can have time to talk a little bit, I'm going really fast. We learned that our pasts are important. Saul's journey was very important, the history of the Bible, the laws and everything that come, and the right paths comes with the alignment. So when everybody's ready for that alignment, then things start to become clear. And that was Jesus, right? That was Jesus coming in and saying, patience, the people will know who I am. What a beautiful message. And the persecution that we have today, it's not like those times, but it's spiritual. And we know, as spiritists, our thoughts, the the spirits around us, they could persecute us. So it's so important that we continue practicing what we're learning with Stephen and those of the way, to keep on pushing, to keep on having that hope and that faith. As Romans 15 21 says, those who were not told about him will see, and those who have not heard will understand. So, I'm going to stop sharing it. This is absolutely just very, very, very beautiful. Thank you, friends. Just the Bible,
Oh,
something we
we thank
understand.
you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Daniel, do you want to say a couple of things? I'm gonna pass the word to you first, then I'm gonna make a couple of comments as well.
Well, that part of Norris, when Jesus always says, like, that's okay, you're not gonna understand it now, you're gonna fail, but that's okay, I have planned it. That's the way things are. And we feel that's so humbling, we feel so small. That's divine intelligence. That's way bigger than any plan that we could make up. So that's impressive.
Yes, this two words, divine intelligence, I think they do apply here. Um, I think that we have three very important perspectives here, and they are working together in this book. And Emmanuel is a very great author in doing this, because we have the Old Testament, we have the Christ as this new upheaval that is changing the world and it's changing the law and bringing the love as the north and the really important paradigm. And we are reading a spiritist book, a psychographed book. So we are facing at the same time the three revelations here. Um, Emmanuel has a book, a beautiful book called On the Way to the Light. Here in Brazil, it's a very famous book. It's called A Caminho da Luz. In this book, we understand all the structure from Genesis to Malachi, all the Old Testament, and what it's actually trying to tell us. And we see from that book that all that story about that garden in Genesis, that apple, that snake, it's actually referring to another planet, a very more elevated planet, a more evolved planet, and that's what that scenario would be. What's this that garden would be about? A happy planet, as Kardec puts to us, and then they were degraded. They left the garden, and then we start the Old Testament. Emmanuel explains to us on this book, On the Way to the Light, that all that prophets that were talking about Jesus, they actually heard about Jesus in the spiritual sphere. So when they were being sent to earth, they were actually being sent to talk about what was in those very, very profound reminiscences in their spirits. And then we have this beautiful path in the Old Testament talking about a Messiah that would come. In this book, Paul and Stephen, we are constantly being faced with these two perspectives, the Old Testament and the Gospel, and we are seeing them in the characters. We're seeing a character that really is all about the Old Testament, as we've seen Jochebed, and we're seeing and now Saul of Tarsus and other Jews in the book, and we're always seeing those Christians that are amazing, that are all about love, and we're comparing them every time. A very important thing to say is that it's all about evolving, and that's what it is about. The Old Testament, and then the Gospel, and then Spiritism. It's step by step. We are on the way to the light, as Emmanuel puts us. And this book really shows us all these perspectives in this very um, text full of sentiments that we can consider and feel with the characters what is happening, and not just in that technical and scientific way. A very important thing for us and to understand the book is to, when we look to the Old Testament, and as Noor brought, Genesis, Leviticus, Exodus, those books, they have divine laws, of course, because in those laws we see love, and we see the need to respect one another. But we are talking properly and literally about civil laws, and as we've seen, they were in that stage. That's why they need the civil law in from for that people to have this divine expression, because otherwise they would not obey to the law. And then we have that way, on the way to the light. And as we go to all through the Old Testament, we're going to see, as Norah brought us, loads of prophecies about Jesus. And then we have this amazing Christ talking about love. Love is the new law. And then we have a dematerialization of the law, because it's not about the civil law anymore. We don't need that anymore. And then with Jesus, we have those Christians that are loving and expressing that they are trying to fulfill the law. And then we have Spiritism, and we have, as we are here today, talking about a Spiritist book that was psychographed by a medium. And we have the law being very, very intelligible in this scientific way, and Emmanuel again in the book, Thought and Life, he brings us the definition of love, how we can learn how to love, and the ways that we have to fulfill to love. And then we're gonna see all those um, important rules that are scientific and are all about love and how love is an energy, as we've been talking in Andrea Luiz's books. And then we see that this book is actually trying to tell us how we have been evolving and comparing those characters to make it very clear to us the reason why Jesus had to come and why he had to come when he came. And then we have Spiritism in the 19th century, bringing us new information in a very specific place in history, all that positivism stuff and doctrines, and bringing us those scientific perspectives. So I think it's beautiful when and when I see a lady and a dear friend like Norah bringing us all those perspectives from the Old Testament and talking about that in this perspective that we are evolving and we are going step by step, and that and I think as spiritists we need to consider this, that the Old Testament really has a huge importance in our lives, because as spiritists a couple of times we don't look back that much, but with this book we see that every step counts, and that's beautiful. Thank you guys so much. Do you guys want to say something else? We still have a couple of minutes.
Actually, I did want to say that with your comments wrong about I hadn't seen the Bible like that in such a long time, and this book is really actually taking us back to that.
Yes.
Just to
Yes.
understand, because it helps so much to now understand like, oh, this is why this is happening. This is why, right? And so yeah, it had been a long time. I was like, wow. I felt like when I was a teenager studying the Bible, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. But of
Yes.
course, we have
Yes.
spiritism. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, dear. So sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yes, we do have spiritism, and I think that that's the story in itself is that view of everything, getting all the snippets that we didn't get, from the books, and just the whole history of the Bible. We were watching a video. We're doing another study. The Bible has had so much. Translations of movements and everything. So really agreed, really, really appreciate for, this book, Paul and Stephen, that our beloved Sheep
Yes.
was able to give that to us because it's
Yes.
current and it's there. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, this book really places the Old Testament in history, and that's beautiful because
Yeah.
here in Brazil, and I know that that happens there in the United States as well. We see people, they go to the Old Testament, they take one verse and they say, "This is God speaking," and they take it out of context, and and out of that they bring this huge amount of producement, and they judge people and they say that people will go to hell. So this book is amazing in those terms because it shows us, yes, there's a context. The Old Testament is really important, and even here in Brazil, and I know that Daniel knows that too. The Spiritist movement really looks with this careful eyes much more to to the New Testament than the Old Testament. We have loads of studies about the New Testament, and a couple of times people don't talk that much about the Old Testament. And it's beautiful. Beautiful because from Genesis to Malachi, they were talking about Jesus. They were saying he is going to come, this Messiah, this Christ that will change the world, that will bring love as this north, that you guys will live your lives through it. He will come. And so I think it's really important for us to talk about the Old Testament, considering its importance. And that book really brings us that. Bro, do you wanna say something?
Uh, Tonight has been really meaningful. I'd like to point out that sentence that Jesus is the shepherd who loves all his sheep and
Mm.
won't lose any of them. That sentence, I was talking some days ago with my kid. We were talking something about God, and and I asked him, "Do you think God punishes?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I don't think so." And he said, "How come God won't punish me? won't punish anybody. So, like, what's the point of being God if you have the power and you won't use it? So his powers is his wisdom is to save us, is to guide us, to educate us, not to punish. In the fourth book of Spiritism, Heaven Hell, we can learn lots about that. So losing no sheep, that means um, you may suffer, you may uh, go to dark places. I mean, dark, low vibrations for the spirit, places full of suffering and torment. But this is not a punish from God. And I use this example to illustrate for him. Uh, I said, imagine you are a bit smaller kid, and you're jumping on and off the couch. And I am an adult, and I understand balance. And I say, hey kid, don't do that. Stop. You will fall down and bump your head on the floor, and you're gonna cry and come after me. He doesn't. He doesn't obey me, and his lips bumps his head on the floor and cries and comes to me. That is hurting. So I'll say, yes, but I warned you and you did not obey me. So I'm gonna lock you up in the room until you die and you perish alone in a dark room. Does that
Perfect.
sound reasonable for you? He said, oh no, that's terrible. You would be a terrible father. And I said, yes, why do you think that God does that to you? To you or to me or to anyone. He loves everyone. The best human being on the planet or the worst criminal is a son of God. Every animal, to the very best friend of ours, to the pest like a mosquito or a flea that torment us, it's all created by God. So he loves and he won't punish, but we suffer the consequences of our mistakes. And the power of God is used to guide us through our mistakes. And every time we break something, we come back through reincarnation to mend it, to make it uh, whole again. Thank you. I spoke a lot more than I.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. You're a great father. That analogy was beautiful and very intelligible for us to use and to understand that. Of course, that does not make sense that for one mistake you're going to be thrown in a hell full of fire for all eternity. Of course, that does not make sense. And unfortunately, we have brothers and sisters of ours still believing in that and still judging other people that will go to that hell. And Nora brought that Old Testament God that would be very furious, that would be always ready to lock you in eternal jail. And how and it's very interesting because we see that Saul was all about that God, because as Nora point, he was an honest man. He was and the book brings us a very interesting information that he was never inclining to those human desires. He was always overcoming them and always trying to be very faithful, believing in God. And he talks a lot about his mother's teachings and how he would overcome those human desires. That's very impressive, because we're talking 2000, more than 2000 2000 years ago. So that's really impressive. And we see that, as Nora pointed, there is a very um, interesting reason why he was the chosen one to be what he was, and to have this huge mission of praying to the Gentiles, to be the apostles to the Gentiles. This is very, very, very pretty. We could, at the end of the day, we could be talking about those comparisons all night. We have reached our time. I will ask one more time. Do you guys want to say something before we finish?
I just want to say thank you, João, Daniel, and also Jesus for breaking that, from the Old Testament laws to, love your neighbors thyself, and to now we're learning through spiritism, and it's very fluid, as we can see, learning from history, to always keep that in mind. And that's my takeaway from finishing up the chapter, to appreciate our past, but to remember all of this is very fluid. And just as we have to be open to the changes, we always need to, we were expected to be open to those changes when Jesus came. It's the same thing. If something, as we're changing, to keep evolving. And that's the thing when I came across spiritism, having that background in Christianity, and then seeing, oh, this is like the more evolved version. A lot of questions are being answered. I'm just so grateful. So this book, spot on. And thanks, guys. Hmm.
Bro, do you wanna say something?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
No, thank you guys. So meaningful tonight. This study was incredible, really amazing. Thank you so much, and good night to you all. See you next time.
Thank you. I thank you guys too. It's really nice looking back and seeing this huge importance that the Old Testament has in our lives, in our history as human beings. Very, very beautiful. I thank you guys one more time. I thank everybody that was here with us, our friends, everybody that is watching this study on demand. Thank you all. Thank you, my friends, so much. Thank you. Bye bye. See you guys next week. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.